Um, I want you to imagine like a classic political thriller. You've got the incredibly paranoid ruler.
Oh, right. And a mysterious foreign spouse who's just manipulating the whole court.
Exactly. Plus, like, secret executions happening in the dead of night,
Mm-hmm.
and this desperate, obsessive search for buried secrets that could upend the entire government.
It's a classic setup.
Right. But now, I want you to take that entire plot and drop it straight into a dark fantasy world. Because in this world, the equivalent of a geopolitical nuclear deterrent is a magical, mind-warping seedling that literally feeds on the corpses of political dissidents.
Yeah, when you take the fragile psychology of a dictator and give him access to an apocalyptic force of nature, the genre stakes completely shift. I mean, it becomes this fascinating case study in how political insecurity manifests when thaumaturgy is involved.
Which is exactly our mission for this deep dive. Today, we are jumping into the source material covering the narrative arc of Path of Exile 2's first act.
Oh, it is such a good one.
It really is.
Mm-hmm.
We are unpacking the tragedy of Ogham in the year 1619. And, we aren't just looking at the surface level monster fights today. We are really dissecting a gripping, fundamentally human story about how Count Geonor's obsession with his own bloodline.
Which was totally fueled by his new wife, Countess Oriana, by the way.
Oh, 100%. How that obsession led to the complete destruction of his own people.
To really grasp the sheer whiplash of these stakes, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the story's protagonist. We all know the standard fantasy trope of, like, waking up in a cozy tavern.
The classic start.
But here, it's like waking up in the back of a police car with no memory, only to find the police are actively trying to execute you.
Talk about a rude awakening.
Seriously, you immediately have to escape a literal hanging, jump off a gallows into a freezing river, wash up on shore, and realize the local government hasn't just been corrupted by power, they have fundamentally lost their grip on reality.
Yeah, and if you really want to understand the true scale of Count Geonor's madness, you can't start at his grand manor. You have to look at the people desperately fleeing from it.
Down into the mud.
Exactly. You transition from the grand political stage down to a muddy, miserable logging encampment called Clearfell.
And we should clarify, this isn't some glamorous rebel base.
Not at all. Clearfell is a hideout of absolute last resort. It highlights just how completely Izamite society is collapsing under Geonor's rule. Because if you know Izamite lore, you know they are a fiercely hierarchical people.
Right. They're usually separated by non-regional clans, all living mixed together but strictly ordered by status.
Yeah, but in Clearfell, that entire societal structure is just gone. Kaput.
The survivors hiding there are this chaotic mix of outcasts forced together simply because they managed to dodge Geonor's deeply dubious arrest warrants.
Very dubious.
You see this breakdown of hierarchy immediately when you look at who's actually sharing campfires. Like, take Renly, for example.
Oh, I love Renly.
He's a blacksmith from Ogham village. And under normal circumstances, a skilled craftsman like him holds a very high standing among the clans. He's highly respected.
So what's he doing hiding in the mud?
Because he flat out refused to make free weapons for the Count's mercenaries.
Which, honestly, good for him. And if you are playing the warrior class in the game, Renly is actually your adoptive father.
Which adds such a personal layer to it all.
It really does. Because your character was abducted by the Count's men for no real crime at all, which makes Renly's presence in Clearfell incredibly personal. It drives home the arbitrary cruelty of Geonor's curges. He isn't targeting criminals.
No, he's just targeting anyone who doesn't immediately kneel.
Exactly. And then you have characters like Una and Finn, who represent an entirely different collision of Izamite social strata.
Yeah, Una is a mystic musician. She's deeply connected to fae spirits and old magics, and her family lived in the Ogham farmlands.
Right. And Finn.
Finn is considered clanless. He's an outcast. He's literally a thief who was completely shunned by his own father as a child. In their normal society, a clanless thief and a mystic farmer shouldn't be interacting at all.
But the source material heavily implies they are romantically linked. When it mentions she was away when her father was arrested, and Finn was also mysteriously elsewhere.
Oh, they were definitely sneaking off together.
Totally. But the detail about Una's father that absolutely gets me is the reason for his arrest.
Oh, this is insane.
His harvest was brought in 1 day late. 1 day. That sounds less like harsh medieval justice and more like, I don't know, a tyrannical HOA where the penalty for tall grass is being fed to a monster.
It's the frantic, paranoid purging of a dictator who sees assassins in every shadow.
Right. Which begs the question, what is the mechanical purpose of all these arrests? What is the Count actually doing with these people?
Well, the physical affliction hitting the land provides a pretty terrifying answer. It acts as a brutal equalizer alongside Geonor's arrests. People are being transformed by this mysterious sickness.
Like the local miller.
Yes, the miller. He was just trying to warn Clearfell about the affliction, and he gets warped into this massive monster trying to saw down the camp's walls.
It's terrifying.
If we look at the mechanics of this corruption, it doesn't just make people sick. It weaponizes their forms. It warps the local flora, raises the dead, and mutates living tissue. So you have Geonor's paranoia ignoring Islamite hierarchy on one hand.
And this monstrous corruption doing the exact same thing on the other.
Precisely. And that dual threat forces you to leave Clearfell and head into the Growwood Forest to find the actual source of the corruption.
Which is where things get really grim. Because that is where you find a mysterious shade referred to as the Hooded One, literally hanging from the Tree of Souls.
But he's not just hanged.
No, the level of overkill here is staggering. He is bound to the tree by ancient magical runes, and he's been impaled by Count Geonor's own magical sword, Agnar.
Geonor didn't just want this guy dead, he wanted him magically anchored to this specific spot.
And breaking those anchors turns into this massive historical excavation.
Because modern Ezamites simply don't possess the magical knowledge to break these bindings anymore. Which means you have to dig into the continent's darkest history.
Right. For anyone who has tracked the lore of this world, the Purity Rebellion is a cornerstone event.
Absolutely. 300 years ago, the Ezamites were a conquered people. They were brutalized by the Eternal Empire, who ruled from Sarn using massive armies empowered by virtue gems.
So to break the runes on the Tree of Souls, you are forced to go back to an ancient Purity Rebellion battlefield called the Red Veil.
You literally have to rip runic spikes from the armor of the fallen.
Which is dark enough on its own, but even that isn't enough to free him. The wound from Geonor's sword created a secondary binding that specifically requires a Count's hand to unlock.
So now you find yourself grave robbing in the Cemetery of the Eternals to find a Count's signet ring.
Which leads to what I think is one of the most tragic encounters in the whole act with Count Locke.
Oh man, Lachlan is heartbreaking.
He is. He's this ancient undead count wandering the cemetery in a frantic amnesiac state. He actually believes his family has just been kidnapped by eternal nobles, specifically Praetor Draven and Consort Centauri.
And you, as the player, help him unlock the gates to find them, only to discover their ancient, dusty graves.
Yeah, because the corruption raising the dead in this region brought Lachlan back, but it didn't restore his memory of a tragedy that happened centuries ago.
The realization of the truth just completely shatters him. It sends him into a blind rage, forcing you to put him down just to get the signet ring. It's a devastating sequence.
The thematic resonance of all this is incredibly heavy. It feels like the land itself is suffering from PTSD.
That is a perfect way to describe it.
Because Geonor's sword wound on the Hooded One proves he didn't just stumble upon this ancient trauma, he actively triggered it. You're literally digging up 300-year-old war trauma, disturbing ancient battlefields, and fighting a grieving amnesiac ghost, all just to break a padlock on a tree.
But that PTSD of the land doesn't just exist in a vacuum. Reviving the Hooded One finally reveals what Count Geonor actually stole from him.
The engine behind the trauma.
Exactly. Geonor stole the seed of corruption.
Now, knowing the history of this world, my immediate theory when seeing the fallout, the mutated monsters, the dead rising, the warped flora.
Yeah, the classic signs.
Right, it tells me that this seed isn't just some glowing magic trinket. It behaves exactly like a remnant of the beast.
And your theory is spot on. The seed is a dark ember. 20 years prior to these events, the Hooded One took this seed into hiding specifically to keep it safe from men of ambition.
Because we all know what happens when ambitious men find a dark ember.
Anyone familiar with the Cataclysm knows exactly what happens when men of ambition try to control the beast. 300 years ago, an eternal magic user named Malachi tried to harness the beast's thaumaturgical power.
And how did that work out for him?
Well, he ended up wiping the entire Eternal Empire off the map in a single instant.
So the sheer, unadulterated hubris of Count Geonor deciding he can control a dark ember is staggering.
It really is. And he isn't just keeping it in a lead box somewhere.
No, the source material makes it clear that all those people he's arresting,
The farmers with the late harvests, the clanless outcasts.
he is systematically feeding their bodies to the seed to intentionally grow its power.
We have to look at the dark logic of how that magic actually works. Feeding bodies to a dark ember isn't like throwing logs on a fire to add mass.
What is it consuming then?
The seed consumes the animus. It feeds on the life force and the terror of the victims. It physically converts human suffering into raw thaumaturgical energy.
Wow. So returning to our political thriller analogy from earlier, Geonor's actions aren't the chaotic whims of a serial killer.
Not at all. They are the calculated logistical feedings required to arm a nuclear deterrent. He is weaponizing the apocalypse.
But if a world leader is actively trying to arm a weapon of mass destruction in his own backyard, the obvious question is, who is he trying to deter? What geopolitical threat is so massive that he needs a pocket-sized cataclysm?
The tragedy is that the threat doesn't exist outside of his own mind.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
It's all in his head.
Entirely. The need for this weapon lies strictly in his paranoid insecurities. Insecurities that have been brilliantly amplified by a deliberate whisper campaign from his new wife, Countess Oriana.
And you see the physical results of this paranoia playing out in real time. Because Ogham village is completely on fire. Geonor is littering the burning ruins with unhinged decrees, demanding that every single villager report to the manor for questioning regarding their mockery.
He's even executing his own inner circle.
Yeah. You find out he publicly executed a nobleman named Eamon, and Eamon's wife, Leitis, barely manages to escape to Clearfield.
Which is incredibly helpful for us because Leitis provides crucial insight into the Count's mind. The core insecurity driving Geonor is the concept of illegitimate authority.
Right, because in Ezomite culture, leaders are traditionally chosen based on merit. The clans follow strength, wisdom, and integrity.
But Geonor wasn't chosen. He inherited his title by blood. His entire right to rule is tied exclusively to the perceived purity of his Ezomite bloodline.
Enter Countess Oriana. She is a foreigner hailing from the harsh Vistiri desert, and somehow she convinces Geonor that his bloodline is dirtied.
She whispers that he has an eternal ancestor lurking in his family tree.
Oh, that is a low blow.
Think about the psychological weight of that accusation. The Eternals were the cruel oppressors of the Ezomite people. They are the historic, hated enemy.
So for Geonor to believe he has eternal blood,
It means he believes his very existence is a betrayal of his people, and that his claim to the throne is a complete fraud.
wow. And Oriana weaponizes this imposter syndrome perfectly.
She does. She promises him that if he feeds the seed and follows her lead, she will give him the absolute power needed to silence any questions about his rule forever.
The way he reacts to this manipulation is horrifying, though. Leitis tells us that the people Geonor arrests aren't just immediately fed to the beast.
No, first they are forced into this massive, brutal excavation project underneath the manor.
Right. They are ordered to dig endlessly until they literally drop from exhaustion, desperately looking for some ancient proof of Geonor's pure heritage buried in the dirt.
And only once their bodies give out.
Then their animus is fed to the seed.
He is systematically destroying his present kingdom in a frantic attempt to find validation in the past. It is a stunning display of desperate rationalization.
And the ultimate tragic irony of this entire story is how Geonor's actions mirror his fears. He is absolutely terrified of being an eternal oppressor. He's so scared of sharing their blood that it completely breaks his mind.
But look at what he actually does to prove he isn't one.
He adopts their exact playbook.
And it's a profound textbook case of psychological projection.
How did the Eternals oppress the Ezomites? By hanging them from the sacred tree of souls, which is exactly what Geonor does to the Hooded One.
Yep.
What was the Eternal source of power? An obsession with the corruption of the beast, which Geonor is currently hoarding and feeding in his basement.
Spot on.
How do the Eternals build their empire? By enslaving and torturing the Ezomites, which is exactly what Geonor is doing with his forced excavation under his manor.
In his desperate attempt to prove he isn't an eternal monster, he completely transforms into one.
It's wild. His obsession with controlling the narrative of his bloodline blinded him to the reality of his actions.
And this paranoia and the endless digging lead directly to the lowest levels of the manor, where his reign reaches its fatal, inevitable conclusion.
The visual horror of that climax is striking. When you finally reach the bottom of that massive excavation hole under the manor, the seed isn't just a glowing little ember you can hold in your hand anymore.
Now you've close.
Because he's been feeding it so much human animus, it has mutated into a massive caged creature. It has an octopus-like head. It's writhing with tentacles. The thaumaturgy has given it a terrifying physical form.
And this is where the political alliance finally shatters.
Oh, the betrayal.
Yes. During the confrontation, Geonor is backed into a corner. He turns to Oriana and demands that she unleash the seed. He wants the ultimate power she promised him so he can finally crush the rebellion and silence his doubts.
And Oriana simply looks at him, calls him weak, grabs the caged beast, and completely abandons him.
She just escapes back to the Vistiri desert.
It is a brutal, calculated betrayal. She played on his insecurities from day one just to get someone else to do the dirty work of feeding and growing the Dark Ember.
And it leaves Geonor with absolutely nothing. His kingdom is burning, his people are dead or displaced, his wife has betrayed him, and the weapon he sacrificed his soul for is gone.
She traded everything for nothing.
Deprived of the seed and overwhelmed by the latent corruption he invited into his own manor, his physical form finally breaks.
He mutates into this giant, corrupted wolf. And the detail that stands out to me during this fight is that while he's physically a monster, he's howling out this incredibly smooth slam poetry about Izamite history.
It's very surreal.
Even as his body warps into a beast, his mind is still desperately clinging to the history and nobility of his people, right up until his dying breath.
The imagery of the wolf is poignant too. It often symbolizes loyalty and the pack in many cultures, which contrasts sharply with how he actually slaughtered his own people.
Right. And looking at the aftermath, it is a sobering picture. Geonor is dead. Ogham is in absolute ruins.
But there's a small glimmer of hope returning to the roots of Izamite culture.
Yeah, with the nobility wiped out, the survivors in the logging camp of Clearfell need a new leader.
And it is heavily implied that Renly, the blacksmith, will take up that mantle.
Which feels like a hard-won return to the old ways. Renly becomes the new clan leader, not because of who his ancestors were, but because of his merit, his skills, and his integrity.
He refused to bend to tyranny when it cost him everything.
It's the true Izamite tradition of merit-based leadership rising from the ashes of a bloodline obsession.
Exactly. Geonor's fear of illegitimate authority is what caused the collapse, but the vacuum he left behind allowed legitimate authority to naturally assert itself.
So synthesizing this entire narrative arc for you, this isn't just a story about a dark fantasy ruler who found a magic rock and turned evil.
Not at all.
It's a deeply human tale about how the fear of losing power is exactly what causes a leader to destroy their own kingdom. Count Geonor literally handed a weapon of mass destruction over to a mysterious outsider simply because he couldn't stand the thought of being inadequate.
He was so afraid of the whispers of his people that he listened to the one whisper that doomed them all.
Which brings up a really unsettling thought that I want you to mull over. We know Countess Oriana manipulated Geonor. She was the one constantly whispering in his ear about his bloodline, driving that frantic excavation.
That's undeniable.
But considering the mechanics of thaumaturgy and how the Dark Ember warps the minds and bodies of everything around it, was Oriana really the only one whispering to him?
Ooh, that's a chilling thought. When you factor in the sheer corrupting presence of the beast, it's highly probable the Ember itself was finding the cracks in his psyche.
Exactly. Does holding a piece of the ancient beast subtly infect the mind of the holder long before it ever physically mutates their body?
It makes you wonder.
Was it the paranoia Geonor felt entirely his own? Or was it the seed, ensuring he kept feeding it the animus it needed to grow? Think about that the next time you find yourself holding on to something you know you should probably let go of.